This is Unhidden Mysteries, Episode 2, Exactly What Was Said, the Joe Rogan Disclosure interview of Tom DeLonge of To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science. At writing, the Joe Rogan Experience interview with Tom DeLonge, member of Blink-182 and founder of To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, is at 3.4 million views. The interview was recorded in October 2017. Regardless of how you feel about Rogan, DeLonge, or the pop-tinged punk of Blink-182, this interview comprised what may be the clearest disclosure currently possible. Now, in the summer of 2020, Joe Rogan has signed an exclusive deal with Spotify and will only post clips on YouTube. The interview starts with references to Art Bell and Rogan's first question. So, you're obsessed with UFOs. Is that safe to say? This took DeLonge slightly off guard. He deflected. He mentioned the terminology advanced aerial threats. I want to stop here and make something clear that will be disclosed later in the interview. You need to decide if you believe it, but history will decide the truth. Tom DeLonge was reportedly given the security clearance of SIS-2 on the property of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. If this is the case, Tom will not be saying anything that has not been declassified for that purpose. Speaking about higher life forms and future technologies, DeLonge said, I think a lot of it is a control system that is pushing humanity forward in a certain direction. He also said, they use time travel. When you use the technology, there's a time difference between what they're doing inside of an artificially created bubble of gravity, of sorts, and what's on the outside, he said. He went on to say, so you could literally fly around, grab a Coke out of someone's hand, and put it in someone else's hand, ostensibly without anyone knowing. When Rogan asks, where are you getting this from? Suddenly much more interested, Tom explains, well, look who I'm surrounded by. He mentions Dr. Hal Puthoff. He mentions that the technology exists. He mentions this is what we're doing at my company. And he mentions Steve Justice, former head of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works and now board member of TTSA. It's at this point that we find out that the JRE is not prepared for this interview. If you want to vet DeLonge and TTSA, you should absolutely read the list of founders and board members. Very briefly, Dr. Hal Puthoff has a resume that includes the National Security Agency laser and energy patents and is a known propulsion expert. Jim Simavin is ex-CIA. Chris Miser is the business sense at TTSA. Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon, whom Tom inaccurately describes in the interview as an undersecretary, are very high-ranking Pentagon officials who have also publicly expressed personal desires to see some form of the truth revealed. Also on team, the aforementioned Steve Justice and Joe Sherman, current head of artificial intelligence for Price Waterhouse Coopers, who is developing a very advanced UAP cataloging app. The list does go on. After explaining TTSA's vertically integrated entertainment concept, Tom disclosed a meeting with government officials at Pentagon City, Virginia. A second meeting then took place elsewhere in a restaurant that was apparently empty. An official sat down with Tom DeLonge at the table and said, "It was the Cold War and we found a life form." When Rogan asks, Why you? Tom explains that his job is communication, albeit with approval, exactly what he is doing into the microphone Rogan has provided. Joe is asking skeptically, what could you do, as he was becoming a part of the process. How ironic. The next thing Tom says is very important. He mentions his based on actual events book series, Secret Machines. Tom mentions specifically private finance, world bankers, people working internationally together, and pushing back against what's been coming here for a long time, using off the book's financing and other such unknown mechanisms. Imagine the complications. The next things Tom DeLonge discloses are truly epic. He says, my company is going to be building this electromagnetic craft that can really do the same thing to time I was telling you about. He takes this opportunity to remind Joe Rogan that the founding of the CIA was 90 days after the crash at Roswell, New Mexico, as well as the creation of the National Security Act. Look at the facts. DeLonge has multiple public connections to the Pentagon, and therefore he has been cleared to say this publicly. As you are now forced to decide how you feel about what you know and how this could possibly be, DeLonge states that, what I believe, and this is very important wording, crashed at Roswell was German from Argentina, but it had hallmarks and technology based on alien technology. He then makes specific reference to the need for the following cover-up. Sobering. I propose that this is the most epic statement ever made about the crash in Roswell. In short, the Nazis were looking for a way to keep the anti-gravity technology of Die Glocke, the bell, out of Allied hands. Roswell happened on or around July 7, 1947. History teaches us that many Nazis fled to South America. There may also be a connection to Operation High Jump, the 4,700-man, 13-ship, and 33-aircraft mission led by Admiral Richard E. Byrd, Jr. Byrd, interestingly, was aboard the USS Mount Olympus. Byrd was later quoted in a Chilean newspaper, interestingly named The Mercury, as saying he feared for hostile planes coming from the polar regions and mentioned the fantastic speed with which the world is shrinking. We may stop and try to contemplate how anyone responsible for the weight of this type of information would explain it to the world. It seems to come easily for Tom, the government not so much. DeLonge confirms that the Nazis were 100 years ahead of us in technology, and that there were two levels of Operation Paperclip that brought Nazi expertise to the United States. Common sense may tell you that those two parts are public and private, the public being with individuals such as Wernher von Braun, and the private being with other individuals such as Hans Kammler and Heinrich Himmler. DeLonge then makes another disclosure that the United States and Russia were, quote, working together, unquote, throughout the Cold War. If all of this is true, it would make sense. Consider for a moment that if reports are true that Ronald and Nancy Reagan experienced an abduction, and then consider SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative, also known as the Star Wars program, supported by Reagan, and his public statement of how the knowledge of an alien race would unite the world. There is no such thing as coincidence. DeLonge goes on to say that although he's not read in, he has been interrogated in a skiff. He mentions reports of craft over our nuclear facilities. Interestingly, he also mentions satellite technology and algorithms designed to gauge the collection of smaller ships and the collection of machines by other machines. He may be referring to what have now been termed tic-tacs. He also refers to what government contacts confidentially call episodic atmospheric visitations. DeLonge says he was brought to Colorado Springs for another meeting that led to the approval of the release of secret machines chasing shadows. He then reports being interrogated over a 2-day period by 6 individuals in a San Diego hotel. When Rogan asks, "What was the thing you should not have known?" DeLonge replies, "In my book, it is my belief we've made incredible strides creating assets to deal with this stuff. If what is in the book is true, I am awestruck." Tom later connects the book, the Astra TR-3B Black Triangle spacecraft, and a YouTube video. To confirm DeLonge's authenticity, you can check the WikiLeaks documents disclosing emails between DeLonge and John Podesta, who was at that time a senior advisor to President Barack Obama. Considering what seems to be widespread disappointment in the Tic Tac and Gimbal FLIR videos, don't be distracted. At this point, Tom goes back to the topic of his advanced electrogravitic propulsion craft. They pull up the TTSA website image of the craft, and Tom explains that part of his mission is to explain zero-point energy or vacuum energy to the public. He says, quote, "1 inch of air can power the United States for a year, maybe more," unquote. That's a start. He explains the underlying electromagnetic wave that powers the atom and therefore all things. Only if you look will this direct you back to the plasma cosmology concepts of Hannes Alf Venn and what leading scientist Wallace Thornhill calls the electric universe. This also concurs to the hidden discoveries of Nikola Tesla. With regard to the craft, DeLonge says it will turn into a ball of light and disappear. DeLonge and Joe Rogan's assistant then search Astra TR-3B Black Triangle, and they view the video from episode 1. Tom then says, "This is the craft from the Secret Machines book, period," unquote. He goes on to explain that the Black Triangle has a size of 40 feet and points out the tail fins that have what I would call a distinct Lockheed Martin appearance, saying, "See the tail fins? That's how you know it's not alien per se." Going on to explain that this is in fact alien technology and they do not need aeronautical aids. He confirms again that his belief is that Black Triangle spacecraft are not of alien origin. When Rogan asks about the credibility of Robert Bob Lazar, DeLonge says, "I'm putting out his autobiography, and George Knapp will write the foreword." Nuff said. This is also amazing. Tom explains senior security clearances and mentions Senior Intelligence Service, also known as SIS, Senior Executive Service, SES, and the Civilian Ranking Charter. An SIS-3, for example, being the equivalent of a 3-star general. Tom said, which I believe would be a federal violation if not telling the truth, that at the head of Skunkworks Engineering, I got an SIS 2-star from the clandestine director of operations. Anything is possible. If you're still with me, and I hope you are, Tom paused before mentioning the ancient, some would say mythological city of Atlantis. When Rogan asks the connection, Tom simply states, "There is a very advanced group that left after a catastrophe and hung around in a small outpost here, and throughout time would push civilization forward. That's who the Greek gods were." Rogan said, "Whoa." DeLonge just said, "Yep. Matter of fact." He added that the Roswell wreckage featured the Greek characters for freedom. He then referenced a meeting with a former NSA and CIA director, possibly Michael Hayden, about secret machines before it was printed. The former director reportedly asked DeLonge to add some specific information regarding Greek mythology. Do we live in a world where what we were taught as mythology is closer to the truth? Quite possibly. When Rogan mentions the well-covered topics of Zechariah Sitchin and his interpretations of ancient Sumerian, DeLonge blesses them as the closest thing we have. A 4,000-year-old Sumerian carving of the complete solar system, sun in the center, was shown on the screen. At this point, Tom DeLonge predicted we will discover life on Europa and Mars to include small microbial life. He also mentioned the discovery of a nuclear isotopes on the surface of Mars that can only be created from a manufactured nuclear blast. DeLonge's statement of "not everything is hunky-dory" is not to be overlooked. You may not like the threat terminology, but we must consider the possibility that the threats may be coming from other governments. Will TTSA do everything Tom has laid out in this interview? Well, that's yet to be seen. Will they build and publicly release what he calls the over-unity machine? Yet to be seen. There is a Regulation A stock offering currently available. In closing, Thomas DeLonge says, "The heart of it is when we do what's called confirmation, not disclosure. Confirmation. How do we tell stories that galvanize the human race? How do we present them to science so they understand that consciousness and a lot of other things are real? How do we build a technology associated with those stories and science that can change the world?" Many of us will continue to find disappointment in the pace of disclosure and confirmation. This is a pace we do not affect if we do not demand the answers. Our plan is to follow the story, help others around us understand, and push humanity forward. There will be more information you don't want to miss. Please subscribe and come back for more Unhidden Mysteries. Discovering the truth about yesterday so we can be ready for tomorrow.